Hello, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex Podcast, the PGA edition. I am your host, Bryan. I'm joined, as always, by Colin Davey and Peter Jennings, a.k.a. CSU Ram. This podcast is brought to you by the Action Network, which Fantasy Labs is a part of. Very quick promo. The Action Network Super Bowl package is out in full glory with breakdowns on which way the line will move, the must-bet props, predictions for the game, and much, much more. Get full access to all of the pro content through the end of the Super Bowl for just $5.20 at actionnetwork.com/Super Bowl. Again, that is $5.20, which matches up with Super Bowl 52 at actionnetwork.com/Super Bowl. All right, let's dive in. Colin, how are you doing? Are you excited for the Super Bowl, or are you just going to be grinding golf this weekend?
No, I'm actually looking forward to that player prop sheet. I have been burned so many times on the national anthem over-under for the length. Mm-hmm. My least favorite was probably the year that Billy Joel did it, because we had the over and we're banking on him hitting long hold, but like that piano just serves as like a monotone, so he's not embracing or embellishing any of the high notes. It was such a bad bet in retrospect, because like if you have a musical accompaniment, like you're staying the course. There's no going on a tangent or anything like that. So I think that Super Bowl prop sheet will be incredibly useful. And get myself a little bit less fishy. Pete, what props are you most excited about this year?
The props I like the most right now are no overtime. I think that's the best one. Bales really likes that one as well. I fired that last year, as well as no 2-point conversion, no missed extra point. A lot of those where you're laying a big price generally have been kind of the better bets. This year's the market's gotten a little bit more efficient, but the no overtime is probably my favorite prop at this point. I'm sure I'll have some of the fun ones as well, but at this point in time, that's my favorite prop in terms of just equity.
For sure, yeah. And Pete and I and Matthew Freeman and Ian Hartitz are going to record a NFL Flux podcast today, a surprise one for the viewers, where we're going to talk about the Super Bowl and the props that are interesting to us as well. Probably hit on the DFS slate a little bit too. So if you're listening to this, it's probably already in the feed, so go listen to that. We'll definitely give more takes on the Super Bowl and prop betting and stuff like that. All right, well, let's talk about last week. Again, an interesting tournament. Jason Day, they ended up having to go to Monday to finish the playoff. Jason Day ended up winning the tournament over Alex Noren. Colin, anything stand out to you from play or ownership or anything like that? We had Finau, interestingly enough, we said that he was going to be the chalk. Absolute chalk, and he was about 38%, 37% in the $33 dog leg. So again, just another really, really chalky guy.
Yeah, I kind of like the flip narrative where you can say congrats to the guy who had a long injury history, wasn't really sure if he was going to return to his old form, but ended up playing really well. And I could be talking about Jason Day or Tiger Woods for that matter, both similarly priced. I was happy with Tiger playing exactly as well as he played to the people. It's just enough to get everyone's interest back, but not enough to ruin any lineups. So I thought it was kind of like a sweet spot. Yeah, I thought I don't know. It was a decently chalky week. Anytime that a 37%er gets in top 5, like that's going to be chalk no matter what. You could still, the question is, could you basically lock in Finau and still go contrarian in other spots? Clearly you could with Jason Day. This is twice now where he's withdrawn from from the Pro-Am portion of a tournament and go on to win it. He did it with FedEx in 2015. So if anything, I think there's like opportunity in people reading too much into tea leaves for withdrawals ahead of the tournament, because that's going to massively deflate ownership. I think it was on one podcast we talked about where Kuchar did it, where he withdrew from the ping pong tournament, and oh my God, that's the thing he loves the most, and it's a surely like he must be up to something. And then like I forget if he won it or like he did really well, but if there's anything to go contrarian, I don't know if I would have played Jason Day without knowing that bit of withdrawal news, but like if he was in prime form and I knew he was at withdrawal risk, yeah, I probably would have played him because I think that's a decent contrarian opportunity. Pete, what do you think about pre-tournament injury jitters? And because like there's other times that people have gotten burned by it before. So is that getting too clever?
It's definitely a dynamic that's interesting from an ownership standpoint. I mean, I do think Day was one of those guys where people actually think that he's a good play when he's coming in kind of injured. I was on the opposite side. I was a little worried about him. I know some sharp guys did really like Day, but after talking with some guys more in the DFS community, shout out to Dink Piece, who had a lot of Jason Day. He said when Jason Day is injured, it's time to push the chips in, or when he's quote unquote injured, it's time to push the chips in. Obviously, you're biased towards some of the results that stand out where he withdraws from the pro-ams, but that goes against all other kind of things that you want to do in sports. You don't want to play these guys when they're injured in general, but maybe there is merit because you're going to get depressed ownership. And Jason Day does have extremely good course fit at Torrey Pines. He hits the ball extremely high, which is a big benefit on those really bouncy greens, and obviously he's had success there. So he wasn't quite as low as I thought he would be because I really thought he was hurt. But it definitely was an interesting angle. And there was a lot of interesting stuff just from ownership last week that I found. But overall, a cool tournament. And best news is Tiger looked really good with his short game. He hit the fewest fairways I think he's ever hit, but he was still kind of in contention, I guess, or, at least competing with these guys. And I think that's going to be great for DFS golf going forward.
Yeah, 100%. Ownership-wise, it was interesting. We had some of these high-risk, high-reward guys that hit the ball pretty far. Guys like Ryan Palmer, J.B. Holmes, Keegan Bradley, all very low-owned and ended up performing very well. Pete, what did you end up doing with Keegan?
No Keegan for me, which is a bummer. And then he stuck that one on 18, almost made it equal. I was actually in first in the $333 tournament for a while on Sunday. My top team ended up finishing 14th. I had J.B. Holmes on that team as well as Brendan Steele and Woodland. All these guys just completely tanked on Sunday afternoon. And then J.B. tilted the shit out of me watching him towards the end. Made 3 bogeys at the most critical time, including putting a pitching wedge into the hazard when both Noren and Ryan Palmer were in trouble. And then, everyone watched him on 18 deliberate for like 10 minutes on what to do. And then instead of going for the green where he has a chance to win, and obviously he thought it was very low probability, he decided to lay up and misses his layup into the rough. So it was classic tilting watching golf, but at the same time, I'm excited it's back. There's no better sweat in DFS when you're rooting for your guys and rooting against everyone else. So.
In a 4-day sweat. I mean, PGA golf.
The fact that you don't watch any golf is just a disgrace.
Yeah. Oh well. All right, let's get into this week's tournament.
That's when the season's really back. It's people yelling at me for not watching it golf. It's like, we're back again. I wouldn't change a thing.
Exactly. Let's get into this week's tournament. We're going to talk about the Phoenix Open, also known as the Waste Management Phoenix Open. You got to get that sponsorship in there. This is in Scottsdale, Arizona at TPC Scottsdale. This is a par 71 playing at 66 yards. We'll talk about course fit. Really loaded field here. Just running through the top guys. It's usually a pretty loaded course. We have Hideki Matsuyama as the highest priced guy, 11.5, and then underneath him we have guys like Jordan Spieth, Jon Rahm, Ricky Fowler, JT. And then down a little bit, we have guys like Leishman Berger. So very, very loaded field. Headlined by Matsuyama, who I guess we could talk about him and course fit because, Colin, I'm curious, like his past 4 years here, this is how he's finished. First place in 2017, first place in 2016, second place in 15, and fourth place in 2014. So, Colin, I'll kick to you to go through course fit. I'm curious, is course fit just Matsuyama, just the golfer that he is he's the fit? And over like a 4-year period, is this like the best course history that we've ever seen over like a 4-year period for like 8 actual legit field?
God, I mean, it's I don't know what the record is, but gosh, if it's not close to, I mean, that's pretty tough to fade. I think like maybe you could have said like Henrik Stenson at Sawgrass before he missed the cut that one year, but like, yeah, it is absolutely close. And in terms of generic fit, the things that pop most often here for sure, driving accuracy. So like distance gets a little bit of a penalty. The only time that like didn't hold was like this fluke year in 2015, but driving accuracy is so important. And then GIR to a lesser degree. So I'm probably going to be targeting ball strikers and giving people with long distance a little bit of a penalty. Putting is kind of a wash as usual. Just such a noisy statistic. But yeah, if you have to target like two metrics this week, it's driving accuracy number one and GIR number two for sure.
Interesting. So Pete, last year we had you and Colin had gotten into a little bit of a disagreement over course history. Colin thinks it's less important. You think it's a little more important. But you had always mentioned that like elite course history, so we're talking like Spieth at Augusta, is something that we should definitely be mindful of. I assume that this qualifies. I mean, is this like you think this is the best course history that we've seen in like a 4-year period?
Yeah, I mean, it's unreal. I saw a stat that he went like 524-3 in his head-to-head matchups over this stretch of time. Obviously, he's won here twice. You look at his adjusted round metric in our on Fantasy Labs models for this course. It's unreal. So yeah, I'm all about Matsuyama this week. 66.8 adjusted round score. I think he makes a ton of sense. The only downside is how much ownership is he going to garner? The good news in terms of ownership is I think people will still look to guys like Jordan Spieth and Jon Rahm at a cheaper price tag. Ricky Fowler, who's normally a favorite of people to take, is also cheap or cheaper and has good course history. So maybe that will bring down his ownership a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think he has the most equity of anyone in the field, regardless of price. And with the pricing, it gets a little interesting. So curious Colin's opinion. Do you have him number one overall, or is Jon Rahm starting to creep hard into your stuff here?
No, Jon Rahm is always up there. I have Hideki number one overall. A lot of that is just kind of some sample size because he's played the course more often than the other two top options, Spieth and Rahm. But it's not like Spieth doesn't have bad history here. Spieth has played it twice, has 2 top tens. Rahm has played it twice as a 5th and a 16th. So it's not like it's bad course history. It's just like a little bit less of a sample size. I think people are still going to gravitate towards Matsuyama. I think that's like once you have course history at this level, it's just pretty hard to ignore from a touting standpoint. And I think people will flock to him. It's interesting when you have 2 other guys that are basically at the same price point, and they have a little bit less equity. I think Matsuyama's equity is pretty tough to ignore, but it's always the question, at what ownership would you fade Matsuyama? If he was at, say, Tony Finau's level last week with 35%, would you fade him? I think it's close.
I would fade him for sure at 35-40%.
Yeah. So what's the break even? Like, is it anything above 30? Like, I could see
I would fade him over 30% too, I think.
Yeah, I think that's about, like, anything less than that, then like you get pretty it's almost not even about Matsuyama. It's almost about like how much equity can you talk yourself into that you get out of Spieth and Rahm, and how much will they be owned? Because it's like one thing we don't talk a lot about, I think, is like ownership correlation. Like if people are way heavier than you might think in Matsuyama, then they're going to be lighter on Spieth and Rahm by definition because they're at the same point. So it really depends on which way you think it's going to swing. Do you think it's tough to say, but I could see myself making a lot of Spieth and Rahm lineups, like if I believe that people are just going to be overdriving Matsuyama because all you're going to hear about is his ridiculous course history. So I start from I at first guessed like I think it's going to be Spieth and Rahm. As far as like the equity of the other guys in that range, like I mean, Fowler has decent history, but not. I mean, there are some miscuts in his, so it's not like he has elite, like even like Matsuyama or even the level of Spieth or Rahm. Justin Thomas is kind of in the same boat, has more missed cuts than made cuts, and just doesn't. I mean, he has upside, but like JT is just so like, yeah, he's volatile week to week, which you don't mind taking GPPs, but it's just tough to. I mean, it also depends on what are you going to do with all that extra savings. So I don't know if I could talk myself into Ricky or JT. I mean, it depends on everyone else in this tier, but there's no one else that I think like really stands out in the mid range. I think is a must play like Finau or Leishman was last week.
Yeah, Pete, what are your thoughts on the rest of this tier? I mean, Matsuyama, I agree, it's very hard to get off like his equity based on his course history. But these other guys, it's not like they have bad history. Like Jordan Spieth, Jon Rahm, like these guys have really good history. Even Ricky, it's been a little up and down. But last year he was fourth place, 2016 he was in second place. He has a couple missed cuts and performances before that. JT is sort of the oddball out as far as course history goes, but I mean, if you just look at his recent form, like there's not been many guys since like August that have been better at golf than him. So I guess, Pete, where do you think Matsuyama is going to end up ownership-wise? And then it seems like this is going to be a nice week to, like you said, get off of the chalky, expensive guy and maybe go to some of these a little bit cheaper and definitely much lower owned studs right below him.
Yeah, I mean, first off, my favorite thing to do is fade the chalk high-end guys and pivot to another stud. That always makes sense to me. These guys are so freaking good at the top. Any of them can win on any given week, and everyone knows that. So when ownership's going to be heavily concentrated on one guy, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially at the top, to fade him. Where I have more trouble and where I'm still trying to figure out kind of the ownership versus equity argument is when there's a guy who's like low to mid price, who has unreal course history, great course fit, and just, everything's lining up. Those are the guys that, I regret fading more often than not. But that's a discussion for another day, I guess. For the top tier, I really like Justin Thomas for ownership. He was a great birdie maker. He sets up extremely well on DraftKings with his scoring. The downside, obviously, is the bad course history. And if you're going to compare these guys to the top with Fowler, Rahm, and Spieth, probably has the least equity, but I think he'll come in by far the lowest owned. So that's a tournament angle I like. And then probably my next favorite guy is Rahm. Rahm, obviously an ASU guy. Outside of that Sunday collapse, he's just really, really trending hard. And there's a good chance he'll be number one, in the world by the end of this year. So I think Jon Rahm makes a lot of sense. You're going to get a discount on him relative to Spieth and Matsuyama. Ricky, I expect to be pretty heavily owned, so I won't have a ton of him, even though I'm still bullish on him having a good year here in 2018. Let's talk about Spieth, but yeah, Spieth maybe the ownership play because he's right next to Matsuyama. This whole tier is really, I think the high end is great from a game theory perspective.
Yeah, and Spieth's history here is really good as well. Obviously, like no one can compete with Matsuyama's history. I mean, he's been in the top four each of the last 4 years. But, I mean, a lot of these guys have great history. So let's dip down to this middle tier. Let's talk guys in like the 8-9K range. And Colin, it seems like there's going to be some really low-owned guys, especially in the 9K range because of these studs. People are definitely going to want to roster Matsuyama, which you're talking ownership correlation, which means guys like Webb Simpson and Daniel Berger, who have very, very good course history here at TPC Scottsdale. I mean, it's two of the better course histories in the field. And it seems like these guys are going to be really low owned because people are going to want to go stars and scrubs with these elite guys. What are your thoughts on this range?
I think there's low ownership here in general. The problem is finding someone that I would get excited about. So you start with the premise of like, look for accuracy guys, and it's a little bit slim. I mean, like you see names that we loved last week, like Holmes and Woodland and Finau, like they're just not as good as a fit here. So it's kind of like, what do you do? I think you start with like still a little bit more expensive, but I think Webb Simpson, even with all the heavy and chalky guys, is still he has kind of like baby Matsuyama course history, and he's just going to be so heavily owned by the time the wrecks are out that like it's going to be tough to ignore him too. Kind of on a similar note, Matt Kuchar has never missed a cut here, is known for being an accuracy guy. I can see people being split between him. And then the one I'm curious on, just because he refuses to put up a bad result, is Austin Cook, who, took off after like a week off, but definitely has the accuracy to compete here. I don't know if there's anything about we always talk about first time at a course and how much does that affect it and what are the dynamics. I'm curious on like what the first timer at like the People's Course, the Waste Management Open, and the party scene is. That like I do like the narrative of like almost like the Las Vegas nightlife about like are the young guys going to get caught up in like the party aspect of it, but like that's like maybe that's reaching too much. But I think the high ownership definitely starts with Simpson and Kuchar. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's probably where it should be. I don't know that I'd pay for Holmes. I don't know that I'd pay for Finau. Yeah. I'm not paying anything for Harris English. He does not belong in his price tag. So,
what do you think of Berger?
Yeah. Berger is like, if he got low enough ownership, like if he got below like 8% ownership, like yeah, I could see that. The reason I'm sour-ish on Berger more often is just like his. According to my new definition of upside, he doesn't have as much of it as I thought. But I mean, if the ownership is low enough, I'll pretty much play anybody like within reason. So I could see that. I mean, it's tougher to construct a lineup with him at 9,500 because like you really like you got to go a lot more balanced because like if you want one of Spieth and Rahm, yeah, then like it's tougher to slot him in. So it depends on how much like the other guys are a must-have.
That's interesting. Yeah, I really like the Austin Cook call in this range at 8-3. Pete, what are your thoughts on guys in this range? And also curious your thoughts on particularly the guys that finished really well last week. I mean, we have guys like Finau and Alex Noren, Gary Woodland, guys that put up good results, but are not as amazing of a fit for this particular course. Do you think there's going to be some recency bias for some of these guys?
Yeah, I think there'll be some recency bias for these guys. I'm with you guys on Austin Cook. He's rating really, really well in my model. Kind of towards the end of the mid-tier, Zach Johnson's getting a lot of love, in the community or the golf community, mainstream media as well as some of the DFS stuff I've already seen. He definitely fits that accuracy narrative as well. And another guy who, has played pretty well here at this course. So he's someone that I think is going to be interesting that will probably end up being somewhat heavily owned. For cash games, you can never go wrong with someone like Matt Kuchar, even though his course history is not that great. I still like Finau, even though he's more of a distance guy. I just think he's someone who's playing extremely well. It's not the amazing course fit that we had last week, but he's another intriguing one that I think will go overlooked because of course history as well. If you want to play the course history angle, Byung-Hun An is going to be super chalk, even though he only has one event in our database, but I think people are going to look to that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about the range. Colin, what do you agree with there?
Yeah, I think Finau's playing well enough overall that like I definitely could find like him in a couple different lineups, just because depending on how his ownership shakes out. But yeah, I think people will ignore that by and large. But he is playing very good golf overall, and yeah, I think I don't know how much people are gonna. I mean, Byung-Hun An is like cheap enough that like yeah, he probably could find his way into a bunch. I think like if anything, like his chalk is trending towards like just odds per dollar, such a driver of ownership that I think people will probably like yeah, I agree that people gravitate towards him more than they should, and hopefully they do because I could just as easily pay a little bit more for like an Austin Cook or even like a Ryan Moore who doesn't have terrible history here either. And get a little bit more leverage on ownership. I like that call.
Yeah, Finau is really interesting. He used to be a guy that like you take him at distance courses, you would fade him when it's an accuracy course. But yeah, playing so well right now, just overall game, you could use him just about at any course right now.
One other guy I should have brought up that I meant to get your guys' opinion on that I think is interesting a little bit is Ryan Palmer. Finally coming back, and obviously had a great week last week. Getting healthy, had shoulder surgery. His wife is battling cancer. Those are things that are, they're not going to show up in the data, but are really important to kind of understand. And obviously, you can, basically, give a reason for why he played so poorly based on those things. But, it's not going to be like a golf stat that you can look at. I hope that he can turn it around and keep playing well here. He did get some love in some of the stuff that I read in like the mainstream golf media world, but he's another interesting one. Doesn't have great course history here, but if he kind of found his game again, he was number 1 in total driving last week. It'd be an interesting guy to at least look at this week. Maybe his ownership will be high because of recency bias, but I'm rooting for him just as a person, given what he's kind of had to overcome.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was great last week. Was 10 below on par 5, so really can attack those par 5s and with his distance. So definitely an interesting guy for sure. All right, well, let's get down to this lower range here. So you guys in like the 7K or lower range. Colin, I'll kick to you first. I'm sure that the guys that you were just so excited to talk about, Molinari, and then of course Ches Reavie sitting here at 7-4 here. It's the same price, both of them. I'm sure that those guys are interesting to you.
You don't need to tell me twice about Reavie normally on an accuracy course. The problem is he's missed the cut the last 3 times that he's played this, so it's kind of like fighting each other as far as trending stats. I'm far more willing to take a flyer on bad history if the ownership is right. But I could see a couple other guys rating a little bit more decently. Unfortunately, Keegan Bradley is one of those people because he has enough good results here that it's all right, it's to Keegan or not to Keegan yet again, the eternal question. I'm always going to like Lucas Glover here just because he's such a good ball striker. The only question there is he's a good cut maker, but maybe doesn't have necessarily the upside. We kind of saw that on Primus Play last week where definitely got across the line and just collapsed on the back half and just really didn't put up any worthwhile DK scoring. And it just makes him really tough to play. Kyle Stanley is always a good ball striker. Hopefully he gets overlooked by his history here, but he always is pretty popular week to week. I mean, his ownership has been 25 and 17% the last couple weeks. Maybe people will be a little bit less on him this week because of a disappointing result. But I could definitely, I am always okay playing him. And then other guy who's trending decently well, kind of flying under the radar, is JJ Spawn, who I loved him as an ownership play last week. Still was a little bit under the radar, put up a decent result. I think I definitely like him from ownership perspective, along with noted pod favorite Emiliano Grillo, who I think should be in a sweet spot for ownership range too, and definitely playable. Encouraging results, definitely has the driving accuracy to compete here. I could see them being most heavy in most of my lineups this week.
Interesting. Yeah, I really love this range, actually. The guys that you mentioned, like Molinari, Reavie, Stanley, is the guy that's really popping. Just his accuracy off the tee and around the greens is incredible. So he seems to fit this course really well. I know that some of these guys have some history issues, which is interesting, but some of them are playing really well, especially Reavie. He's been top 25 and the last 10 tournaments. I mean, it's been ridiculous. Pete, what are your thoughts on this range? And I'm curious your thoughts specifically on a guy like Steve Stricker at 7-3. I know it's never exciting to take an older guy, but if we're looking for accuracy, some of these guys in the 7K range are standing out.
Yeah, if you're looking for accuracy, I can see going him. I'm not going to play Steve Stricker, even though he's rating somewhat high in my model. I just like some guys around him so much. Love Francesco Molinari. He'll probably be pretty chalky, but way too cheap for the quality of golfer that you're getting with him. I imagine his ownership will go up as the stakes rise. So he seems like a pretty sharp play. Keegan Bradley has a ton of pro trends, is rating high. The nice thing is he doesn't have great course history for me, but it's obviously not bad. I would say it's a little below average. Is that how you'd rate it, Colin, for Keegan, his course history?
Yeah, I'd call it midland. I mean, like it's a mix of both good and bad. Like I call it like on par neutral.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking. So he's one that I'll have to figure out. I probably will fade him, but I'm not. I don't have a lot of conviction on what I'm going to do with him. He always tilts me. We've talked about him a lot here on the podcast. Emiliano Grillo's one guy that I'm starting to hope to play again. Obviously, he was great in 2016. Really struggled last year, but finding his form again. And if you're going to take someone in an accuracy situation, he's someone I'm constantly looking at. So really like him. James Hahn, I've seen touted a couple times. Not sure I can find a lot of love for him. Not great course history, but he's a little bit intriguing. And Colin Hidden guys I think make a lot of sense. I was going to bring up Spawn as well as kind of a sneaky play here. I still think his ownership will be kind of down. But that's kind of where I'm looking in this low end.
Pete, what are your thoughts on a guy like Zach Johnson? I mean, he's been playing really well of late. He has good history here. And if you're looking for an accuracy guy at the 7K range, it seems like he is a fairly good cash game play. What are your thoughts on him at 7-7?
Yeah, I mentioned him in kind of towards the bottom of the mid-tier, and I really do like him. He's ranking really high in my model. I do think his ownership is going to go up as the week goes on. Like I mentioned that he's been touted quite a bit in the mainstream golf media. I've already seen stuff on him in the DFS community. So I imagine that his ownership will be pretty high. But, he's a guy who's playing great course fit, and pretty good course history here too. So it's a nice combination of those things. The only downside with Zach Johnson would be ownership. So yeah, I agree with you. I think he's a good cash game play.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sorry if I missed that analysis. Colin, any thoughts on any of the guys that Pete mentioned? And just from a roster construction standpoint, it seems like people are just going to load up on these mid 7K guys, which is going to allow you to get up to Matsuyama's speed. So when you're talking like ownership correlation, not only does taking Matsuyama mean lower ownership for speed, but it also means that all these 7K guys are going to be especially chalky if Matsuyama is going to be chalky. So it seems like that's going to be like the very popular roster construction move as opposed to going guys in the 9K range, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you maybe even like there's always like one like sub 7K guys that gets like super even chalkier. Last week it was Chess and Hadley, which I've never agreed with. People might still go back to the well just because they need so much savings to fit in Matsuyama. But yeah, I think you're gonna have to go low 7K to get Matsuyama. One guy we didn't talk about still, Brendan Steele, is probably always going to be up there just because he's always in that sweet spot, like getting a lot of savings. But yeah, I agree. I think that if you want like to steer away from ownership, it basically starts at like 7,900 to like 8,600. You can basically count on low ownership there across the board.
All right, let's get into segment just where we talk about guys that are going to be intriguing at like, let's say 5% ownership or less. Pete, who's standing out in that regard?
I was going to bring up Spawn, and then Colin kind of made me nervous that he might be too heavily owned here. But he's someone that I'm really looking at in terms of ownership. You look at some other guys here that might come in somewhat low owned. A Lucas Glover after he burned everyone on Sunday. He has bad course history, but at his price tag, I could find some love for him potentially. All these guys kind of in the 7K range, I think, are going to come in pretty low on because there's so many different options. So I would just go with the guys that you have the most conviction in this range. I'm going to stay with Spawn, but I guess I'm kind of stealing Colin's pick here. I think he'll be right around that 5%, and I just love him at that price tag. So that's going to be my guy. That's kind of my favorite play in this range. And then I still think Justin Thomas will come in maybe 10% owned, which I think is a really nice play given his upside pretty much any week. I think the course history and kind of all the different dynamics are something that I'm going to skew down just because I think he's a little bit different golfer over the last year.
Colin, what do you think is more correlated with ownership, recent play or course history? I mean, like the Ches example is the most stark one here. Poor history, but his recent play is just about as solid. Like if you're looking at his recent play just for cash games, he's been about as solid as you could ask for a golfer. And then to a lesser extent, like a guy like Kevin Streelman, like he's missed the last 2 cuts, but he's been incredibly accurate over his last couple of tournaments. So he could pop in models. So I guess my question, ownership, do you think people are going to steer more towards recent play or course history?
I think at the extremes, I think history influences ownership a lot more. Like when you have overwhelming results, then that tends to dominate. But like when it's a little bit more muddled, then like people have or like if it's more muddled or course history is a wash, then I think recency can take over. I think it's tough to see, like, and I don't think people treat extreme bad course history the same thing as they treat extreme good course history. I think if people have extreme good, that tends to dominate everything else. If people have extreme bad, like recency could still steer them into ownership. So like it's kind of 2 sides of the same coin.
Interesting. Any other guys standing out to you in the 5% or less ownership?
The guy that like still seems to fly on the radar that I feels like it's going to be our pod favorite is Peter Uihlein, who has never played this course before. So, and like doesn't necessarily have the greatest fit, but like just playing really well overall right now, like at 5%, like I think he'll be under 5%. You could find worse flyers at 6,800, especially like if you decide you can't live without Matsuyama and just need some savings.
Sounds great. All right, let's pick some winners. Let's see what order. I can't remember what order we went in last. You guys remember?
I think I'm due first because.
Yeah, I think I'm second.
Okay. Yeah. So first, Colin second. I'll go third.
Yeah, I'll take Matsuyama.
Yeah. That's fair.
I will take Spieth.
All right. Twist my arm. I guess I will take Jon Rahm.
Pretty even distribution there for you guys.
Yeah. All right, let's see here. Let's go below 9K. I'm gonna go Webb. You go chalky. Colin, I think it's you.
Oh yeah. Give me Zach Johnson.
CJ, I like it. All right. And Pete ran us out.
Damn, I was hoping I could get Zach Johnson. I'll take Austin Cook for fun. I'll go with the Austin Cook angle. I know there's a little more win equity potentially with someone like Gary Woodland, but I'll go with Austin Cook here.
I like that call a lot. He seems to fit this course really well, so I think he's going to be an interesting play for sure. Okay, well, we will end it there. Thank you guys for listening or watching as always. Definitely go check out the NFL Flux podcast that Pete and I are about to record where we talk about Super Bowl and props. Good luck this week at the Phoenix Open, and we'll talk to you guys next week.